All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate
Vasudevaya.
Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Hare Krishna. Good morning, everyone. So, we continue our study of Srimad Bhagavatam. We're on the second canto, the 10th chapter, and today's verse is number 20. Nasike nirabhidyetam dodhuyati nabhasvati tatravayor gandhavaho grano nasi jigrikshata. Nasike nirabhidyetam dodhuyati nabhasvati tatravayor gandhavaho grano nasi jigrikshata. Nasike nirabhidyetam dodhuyati nabhasvati tatravayor gandhavaho grahno nasi jigrikshata. Please chant.
नासिके निरभिध्येतां दुधूयति नभस्वति तत्र वायुर्गन्धवाहो घ्राणो नसि जिगीर्षिता.
Hare Krishna. Nashike niravidyatam dadhuyati navashati tatra vayur gandhavaho grinano nashi jigrishataha.
Hare Krishna. Nasike nirabhiditayam dodhuyati navasbhati tatta vayur gandhavayo dhano nasi jigrashataha. Hare Krishna.
Nasike nirabhidyetam dadhyutyati nabhasvati tatra vayur gandhavaho grano nasi jigushata.
नासिके निर्भिद्येतां दोधूयति नभस्वति तत्र वायुर्गन्धवो घ्राणो नसि जिगृक्षता.
Hare Krishna. Nasike nirabhidyetam dodhuyati navasvati tatra vayurgandhavaho grahano nasi jigrishataha. Hare Krishna.
Okay. Nasike, in the nostrils. Oops. There we go. Nirpidyetam, being developed. Dodhuyati, rapidly blowing. Nabhasvati, air. air respiration. Tatra, thereupon. Vayuhu, air. Gandha, vahaha, smelling odor. Grahnaha, scent of smell. Nasi, in the nose. Jigrikshataha, desiring to smell odors. Translation and purport by Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Thereafter, when the Supreme Purusha desired to smell odors, the nostrils and respiration were generated. The nasal instrument and odors came into existence, and the controlling deity of air, carrying smell, also became manifested. Purport. The nasal instrument, odor, and the controlling deity of air, smelling, and so on, all became manifested simultaneously when the Lord desired to smell. The Vedic mantras confirm this statement in the Upanishads statement that everything is first desired by the Supreme before the subordinate living entity can act upon it. The living entity can see only when the Lord sees. The living entity can smell when the Lord smells, and so on. The idea is that the living entity cannot do anything independently. He can simply think of doing something independently, but he cannot act independently. This independence in thinking is there by the grace of the Lord, but the thinking can be given shape by the grace of the Lord, and therefore the common saying is that man proposes and God disposes. The whole explanation is on the subject of the absolute dependence of the living entities and the absolute independence of the Supreme Lord. Less intelligent persons claiming to be on an equal level with God must first prove themselves to be absolute and independent, and then they must substantiate their claim to being one with God. Translation again. Thereafter, when the Supreme Purusha desired to smell odors, the nostrils and respiration were generated. The nasal instrument and odors came into existence, and the controlling deity of air, carrying smell, also became manifested. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastabhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravan Pacharya Nirvishesha Shrimi Bhari Pashati Deshatare Om Ajnanati Mirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Nena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Panchakalpatrubhyas Chakrapa Sindhuya Eva Chapaditanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. So it's actually interesting because several months ago, maybe even half a year ago, we were talking about how there are controlling deities of the senses, and they all come together. The elements, the sense that is related to that element, the controlling deity of that sense, the sense organ, the sense out, all of these things manifest together. And I just happen to have, whatever it was, 6, 7, 8 months ago, I just happened to have the one that was referring to the sense of smell, which I don't have. I don't have a sense of smell. And so here we are today, and again, we're on subject matter that I don't have direct perception of, sense of smell. But today's verse and purport, they're talking about something far beyond just the details of what this verse is. It's talking about how the living entity, all of these verses are doing this in different ways, but it's saying how the living entities cannot independently act, right? The idea is that we can't, first of all, we can't do anything that the Lord hasn't done. Srila Prabhupada mentions in his purport that if the Lord didn't see, we couldn't see. If the Lord couldn't smell, we couldn't smell, and so on. And so when we read descriptions of the universal form of the Lord, whether it's in Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita, or we read sections about the opulences of the Absolute, and we find out that the sun and moon are his eyes, for example, or that he's the tasted water. Sometimes we understand these things on some level, but there's a much deeper level that we can understand these things on. And this is what Srila Prabhupada pointed out in this purport today. So when it says that the sun and moon are his eyes, it doesn't just mean that he sees everything. Without the sun or the moon or a conversion of one or the other, we can't see without light, right? Every form of light that we have in this material world is manifest from the sun. And one might say, no, that's crazy talk, because, man made electricity, we make these generators, and we can have light anytime. The sun doesn't have to be out, right? One might say that. But every form of electricity is, it comes about by stored energy from the sun, whether you're burning wood or you're burning coal or burning what are known as natural gases. All of these took energy from the sun and stored it like a battery almost. And then that light can be drawn back out. So any form of light we have is either directly or indirectly a manifestation of the sun's energy. So what Krishna is also saying, aside from that he sees everything, is that he's saying that if he didn't see, in other words, if there were no sun and moon, then we also could not see, right? So the same thing, I am the taste and water. It's not just so that we can appreciate, also that just means, anyway, it's not just so that we can appreciate, Krishna's life force when we're drinking water, something like that. It requires water for us to taste. If our tongue were completely dry, our taste buds wouldn't work, right? So it's when Krishna is saying that he's the taste and water, he's actually saying that he's the ability to taste things, right? So all these are there like that. So if Krishna didn't taste, we couldn't taste. If Krishna couldn't smell, we couldn't smell. If Krishna couldn't see, we couldn't see. If Krishna couldn't feel tactile, we couldn't feel, etc. It goes on. Hear, if he couldn't hear, we couldn't hear. And so we can read about these various descriptions and we can understand that we are not independent. We can't do anything that he hasn't already done or hasn't willed for us to do or happen, right? As Srila Prabhupada pointed out in his purport, we, living entities, are absolutely dependent, and the Supreme Lord is absolutely independent. So he is free to do anything at any time, but our freedom, again, as Srila Prabhupada pointed out in today's purport, is limited to thinking. In order to make a thought an action, the will of the Supreme must be there, right? We hear this many times, not a blade of grass moves without his will. Srila Prabhupada mentions that in a couple Bhagavad Gita purports, and several Srimad Bhagavatam purports, and then obviously in lectures. Not a blade of grass moves without the will or the sanction of the Lord. So referring back to verse 14 of this chapter, because this whole section is obviously related. These verses that we're studying now are explaining how the Lord divides one into three. So one is he himself. And as Mahavishnu, he expands that into three. And those three are the controlling entities, the controlled entities, and the material bodies. And so his expansion of these various things, he's expanding as the controlling deities of, in today's verse, smell, the controlled entities, so the jivas, who are controlled by whatever these senses are, and then the material bodies. The material bodies are that which we perceive these things through, right? If we didn't have these material senses, we wouldn't be able to experience these materials. So I don't have the material sense of smell, so I can't experience that scent, that sense. The controlling deity is still there. I'm just not qualified to experience it, right? So these verses are explaining how, when in material consciousness, we, rebellious living entities, are under the very strict, stringent laws of material nature. The only independence we have is actually illusory, right? But if we really analyze it, we can actually draw back that curtain and see that we actually are not in control of anything, right? We think that we're in control of things, like, I want to raise my right hand. There it is. I raised it. So I feel like I'm in control. There are certain things that karmically I've I've been able to do in the past, and so I think that I'll always be able to do them. And so I think that I'm the doer. I think I can do this. If I see a problem, maybe something is broken. So that a door, for example, the door hinge is creaking, or it's not lining up properly, so it's not latching when it closes. I know mechanically how to manipulate that so it actually works. So it doesn't creak, and so it actually closes properly. But that's actually an illusion, because I can't do any of that. I can think about that, but it doesn't actually happen until the Lord wills it, right? And the Lord can take that away at any point in time. He can also give us the ability to do things that weren't previously within our karmic ability. So all that is to say that we are entirely dependent on the Supreme Lord, even though it feels like we're not. If we really examine it, we can see that we actually can't do anything. There are certain things that we just have to do. We see that material nature is pushing us forward through these motions that we can't do, like breathing or circulating blood, or anything like that. We're not actually consciously doing any of those things. They're just happening. If we actually had to think, oh, I should, I have to remember to breathe, I have to remember to circulate my blood, I have to remember to, digest the food, and all these different things, there's no way we'd be able to do it. All these things are going on by material nature, right? So we're entirely dependent on the Supreme Lord. The purport of verse 13 of this chapter explain that in our conditioned state, we are bound to creation and annihilation, right? So sometimes we're manifest, sometimes we're unmanifest. But we, the spirit soul, we're always potent. There's always some potency there. But we're only able to exhibit that potency when the Lord allows it, right? So these infinite universes, they're breathed in and out from Mahavishnu. So sometimes when they're out, they're manifest, and when they're in, they're unmanifest. So although the potency is there, even when we're within the body of Mahavishnu, we can't act upon any of that. And so when the Supreme Lord breathes out and these infinite universes are manifested through his pores, then he does these things, these verses that we're describing. So he wants to see, so he opens his eyes. He wants to smell. So all of these things come into existence because of his desire. Then, since he desired that, and now it's available, it's open, now we can also experience these things if we have the proper qualification. So this is how this is how we are situated in the material nature. So conditioned souls, this is how we can experience things. Only when the Supreme Lord is experiencing. So half of the time we're actually not experiencing anything. We're just existing, right? And so when everything is finally manifest, then we are able to go ahead and work within the realm of the laws of material nature to try to accomplish things, right? But we cannot actually accomplish anything on our own. This is what's really being emphasized throughout these verses. So there's a common phrase that is spoken among the devotees, and it's that you are not the doer. Who's heard? I think everybody's heard it, at least. Devotees say it all the time. You're not the doer, Prabhu. You know, when we're trying to, when we get frustrated about something, or we want something to go a certain way, and well, that's the same thing. It's frustration. It doesn't go our way, and we're really, you know, getting anxious about it. And so some senior devotee, or maybe even some junior devotee, will come up and, you know, give us a pat on the back and say, "You're not the doer, Prabhu." Right? I think we've all heard it. I've heard it a lot. I've heard it so often, as a matter of fact, that I just assumed that everyone knew that they weren't the doer, right? And anyone who ever came in contact with devotees must know that they're not the doer, because, you know, we've heard it so many times. But then I found out that going through the ashram, like living in an ashram experience, can be very different than, you know, living on the outside and experiencing Krishna consciousness. So not everyone has this experience of every time, you know, someone gets frustrated, you know, someone, you know, comes out as if it's scripted. You know, every time a devotee in the ashram is frustrated, someone's going to pop out of nowhere and say, "You're not the doer, Prabhu," right? But not everybody had that experience. So a couple of years ago, I was teaching a Bhakti Shastri class in Mayapur, and this idea of us not being the doer came up. And one of the students, he had some doubt about that, right? And as I've mentioned before, doubt is not a bad thing. Doubt is actually a sign of intelligence. It means that we are able to process information coming in and seeing when it doesn't necessarily seem to line up according to according to the other experiences we've had, the other things that we've read, etc., the other things that we've been told from the sadhus. And so this devotee had some doubt. He said, "But wait, but we kind of are the doers, aren't we?" And it's not that he tried to argue this based on experience or mundane logic. He's actually quoting Shastra, which is a great way to express it. If anyone that has a doubt, it should always be based on Shastra. Wait a second, you're saying this, and this is in Shastra, but I also remember I read in Shastra this, and that doesn't seem to make sense. So how can we reconcile that? How can I understand how both of these things simultaneously are correct, right? This is how doubts and resolution of doubts should always be. They should always be based on Shastra, and they should always be resolved by Shastra. So this, anyway, this was one discussion we were having. And the reason he had a doubt about it, it's not that he had a complete doubt that no, we're complete doers. We are, you know, we do everything. But he said, but we are doers in a sense, right? And so he cited the 18th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Let me find the exact. Somehow this scrolled a bit. Back a little bit. I think it's 14. Yeah. All right. So I'll start on verse 13. So in Bhagavad Gita, 18th chapter, Krishna explains to Arjuna that there are 5 causes for action. So basically, there are 5 doers. the 5 causes of action. So Krishna says in text 13, O mighty armed Arjuna, according to the Vedanta, so this is according to Shastra, it's not just, because Krishna, anything he says is absolutely true, but he knows that people in general, they don't have scruples, right? So they'll just figure, well, Krishna says it and it's true. What if I just say it? Can't that be true too? So Krishna, he won't just say something. He'll show how it's also given in Shastra. So, just in case someone thinks Krishna is an ordinary person, no, he's not. But when he says something, he'll always back it up. Or he'll have his devotee do it, right? Like when he says, he told Arjuna to declare it boldly that his devotee never perishes. Because if he says it, people may not believe it. But the devotee says it, then it's absolutely true. So Krishna is saying, according to the Vedanta, there are 5 causes for the accomplishment of all action. Now learn of these from me. Then the next verse, it lists the 5 causes. So there's the place of action, which is referring to the body. The performer, right? That's us, the jiva, the rebellious jiva. The various senses, the many different kinds of endeavor, and ultimately the super soul. These are the 5 factors of action. So this Prabhu said, okay, so then isn't it true that we are doers, right? And so the idea is that we're not the doer, we're not the ultimate doer. The super soul, as pointed out in this verse, that's listing these 5, is the ultimate doer. But we, as Srila Prabhupada points out in today's purport, we have the ability to think, right? To think on something. And if that thought is within our karma and Krishna allows that to graduate from a thought to an action, then something happens, right? So we are a factor of doing, but we are not the ultimate doer. So this is why this phrase is there. And the reason this Prabhu had doubt, it wasn't unfounded. We've heard it so many times, but Srila Prabhupada didn't say it a lot. He said it very few times in those words. But philosophically, the way things are explained, it's clear, right? It's clear that we're not the doer. But sometimes when we're hearing things and then they evolve from something and then it turns into this whole thing. So anyway, he was right to try to clarify this, right? So these are the 5 factors of action. Then we'll continue. Text 15. Whatever right or wrong action a man performs by body, mind, or speech is caused by these 5 factors. Now this purport's very interesting. I want to read this purport. This is 18:15, Bhagavad Gita. Srila Prabhupada says, the words right and wrong are very significant in this verse. Right work is work done in terms of the prescribed directions in the scriptures, and wrong work is done against the principles of scriptural injunctions. But whatever is done requires these 5 factors for its complete performance. So this actually comes up often, more often than we think or we would expect, of how important Shastra is in everything. So there's a whole chapter called Divine and Demonic Natures in Bhagavad Gita. And the determining factor, what distinguishes between the divine and the demonic nature, is whether or not one follows Shastra. No surprise. Also, basically any list we have, like we have from Shraddha to Prema, for example,
60.
these 9. We see that as we progress through, we have a better understanding of Shastra. So when we're just at Shraddha, we just have faith. then we've heard some small idea from the devotees, and so we have faith in the process. It's not really connected to Shastra so much, but there is obviously some Shastra that's coming through other sources. Then there's Sadhu Sangha. We start associating with devotees. Now there, the Shastra is increasing, right? Because the sadhus are only talking about Shastra, right? Then we start Bhajana Kriya, right? The actual process under the guidance of the spiritual master. Now we actually have Guru Sadhu Shastra, right? And we're following the Shastra. So then we become, so then we want to weed out the anarthas, the things that are holding us back. Again, based on Shastra, right? And then we become steady. And Srila Prabhupada calls that, when we get to the point of Nishta, that's steady faith. So before, faith is there, but it's not steady, it's not strong. And there's also these terms, Lokika Shraddha and Shastriya Shraddha. Lokika Shraddha is fickle. It's not, it's faith, but it can be swayed. It's not backed up by anything. It may be strong, but it's not deep. It's not deeply rooted. So in other words, if someone challenges your faith, you may not be able to explain it. You won't change your way, but you won't be able to successfully explain it to someone else why one should have faith. But when you have Shastriya Shraddha, that means you can actually explain it. Someone says, well, why do you think like this? And then you can explain it according to Shastra. So as we go from Shraddha to Prema, it's just a better understanding of Shastra. So that's there. So here in this verse, it's right and wrong. It's dependent on whether it's following the prescribed directions in Shastra. Divine and demonic nature. It's whether you're actually following Shastra. So this theme is always there. We don't always tend to see it. In fact, I was having a conversation with someone, and it blew my mind, because they were saying that they were going through Srila Rupa Goswami's work, so Nectar of Devotion, Nectar of Instruction, and their analysis of Srila Rupa Goswami's work was that it's all it's all about bhakti rasa amrita sindhu, right? And it's not so much about study of Shastra. And I was thinking, what? How could one come to this conclusion? And their idea was that Shastra wasn't that important actually, but engaging in devotional service was. And my whole question was, how do you actually engage in Krishna service if you don't know Shastra? Like Shastra shows us how to engage in devotional service. And at first, when we were having the conversation, I wasn't really all that prepared because I hadn't recently read through Srila Rupa Goswami's stuff. So I was giving philosophical answers based on other Shastras, how Shastra is very important. And she said, no, I want you to give me some quotes from Srila Rupa Goswami. I said, okay, yeah, sure, I'll do that. Just give me a couple of days. I got to refamiliarize myself with it. But right there in Nectar of Instruction, Niyamagraha, it's talking about not only the need of Shastra, but the need to apply it properly. Because there's two ways to misapply Shastra. There's the way where you think, I don't need it. I can just engage in bhakti directly. That's the one way. And the other way to misuse Shastra is to blindly follow the rules without actually understanding. Right. So one should understand the Shastra to the point where you know why you're doing the things that you're doing. Right. It's not just that you've heard something and so that's okay. That's good. That's Lokika Shraddha. But Shastriya Shraddha, this is when you actually understand why you're doing the things that you're doing. Then once you understand why and you're following properly and you have the right amount of sincerity, then you actually start doing it spontaneously. So first you're doing it for the right reasons, but then you're doing it because you want to do it, right? You have a taste for it, so you actually want to do it. Then you need to do it, right? And then it's just, it's absolutely spontaneous. And this is what we're going for. This is what Srila Rupa Goswami is bringing us to this platform of spontaneous devotion, but it has to go through the process of the regulative injunctions from Shastra. Otherwise, it's not just that one day we'll wake up and we'll spontaneously be attracted to Krishna. This happens by understanding that we are currently spontaneously attracted to matter. So we have to understand that there's no satisfaction in being spontaneously attracted to matter. And it's not that our attraction to material nature is necessarily a bad thing, because whatever we're attracted to in material nature is actually just an aspect of Krishna. This is what this whole section is talking about. Anything we're experiencing it because Krishna experienced it. Anything we're dealing with is an expansion of his form, including ourselves. We are also an expansion of Krishna. We're part and parcel of him. We're infinitesimal parts. And he's always there with us as Paramatma, right? So when we understand this, then as we cultivate this knowledge through the process of sadhana bhakti, everything becomes clearer. The Cheto Darpana Marjan process, everything becomes clearer. We're asking Krishna to engage us in service. We're actually accepting the service by studying his instructions for us. Because the Shastra, after all, is Krishna's instructions for us to get out of this material world. Vedesha sarvam aham eva vedyo vedantkrit vedavit eva chaham. Of all the Vedas, Krishna is to be known. So all the Vedic instruction is telling us how successfully go to Krishna. If we try it any other way, whether it's by our own strength, we try to build a stairway to heaven, for example, as some have tried. Or if we try to intellectually just figure it out, or we try, whatever the case may be, if it's not based on Shastra, as Srila Rupa Goswami points out, it's causing an unnecessary disturbance in society. We have to go through Shruti Smriti Puranadi Panchatra Vidimbina. All of our actions should be backed by Shastra. We should know why we're doing all of these things, and it should be based on Shastra. It shouldn't be a feeling. It shouldn't be what we think is currently acceptable by society. It shouldn't be whimsical. It has to be based on Shastra. So that's what anyway, it comes up a lot, but anyway, it just came up, so I brought it up. So then continue on verse 16 of chapter 18 Bhagavad Gita. Krishna continues, therefore, one who thinks himself the only doer, not considering the 5 factors, is certainly not very intelligent and cannot see things as they are. So one who sees himself as the only doer, not understanding that the senses are there, the body, the Paramatma, and the different types of endeavor, then they're not seeing things as they are. Then at this point, I want to visit a verse from Bhagavad Gita, an earlier verse, 327. Prakrite kriyamana ani gunai karmani sarvasa ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate. The spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the 3 modes of material nature. And Srila Prabhupada points out in that purport that there can be 2 people, one who's in Krishna consciousness, one who's in material consciousness, and externally they could be doing the same exact activity and you wouldn't know the difference between them. But there's a wide gulf of difference in their positions. One is doing these activities strictly for Krishna service, and one of them is doing it because he thinks himself the doer, right? He doesn't understand that the 3 modes of material nature, in other words, these other factors of action, the body, the senses, the types of endeavor, He's not taking those into consideration. And the super soul, he's not taking into consideration the laws that Paramatma put down for the rebellious living entities. Yeah, so bewildered by the influence of false ego, we think that we are the doers. We think we're independent. So then back to the 18th chapter, verse 17, Krishna continues, one who is not motivated by false ego, whose intelligence is not entangled, though he kills men in this world, does not kill, nor is he bound by his actions. So this is where Krishna is explaining to Arjuna that even though you'll be acting, in this case, you are not the doer at all, right? So there are 5 factors of action, but if you are surrendered to Krishna, taking his instructions based on Shastra, or Arjuna had Krishna's personal association, even though Krishna, while he's giving the instructions, is quoting from Shastra, right? So he is acting according to Shastra, but he has the added benefit of having Krishna personally present there. Since he is acting strictly according to Shastra and the desires of Krishna, he is not the doer, because the doer implies that that there's karma, right? So there's karma means that there's an action that produces, I lost the word produces a reaction, right? So it's mentioned in Bhagavad Gita that there's karma, and there's vikarma, and there's akarma. So there are actions, karma, there are forbidden actions, vikarma, and there's akarma, inaction. It means that once one is not bewildered by the influence of false ego, once one is actually using their free will in the proper direction to serve Krishna, not to try to serve themselves, once one understands that they are completely dependent on Krishna and acts accordingly, only engages in pure devotional service, they no longer perform any action because there's no reaction. So that's akarma, right? And so for the devotee, or for the aspiring devotee, there aren't really 3, karma, vikarma, and akarma. There's not action, forbidden action, and inaction. There's only forbidden action and inaction. Because any action, even if it's according to Shastra, if we consider ourselves the doer, that's forbidden action for an aspiring Vaishnava, right? So it simplifies it. Instead of 3 things, actually we realize, no, there are only 2 things. Because even being pious in this material world and following Shastra, but for the sake of just being a better person, right? That's no bueno, that's no good, right? We want to understand that the reason we're following Shastra is to please Krishna. It's not to become a better person. It's not to do anything but serve Krishna, right? Not to independently try to alleviate the sufferings of the material world. It's just to serve Krishna, to do as Krishna pleases. And so in order to do that, we have to understand Shastra. So, sorry, I'm using a different computer now, and things are happening differently. So it's taking me a little bit to adjust. Okay, so I'll just wrap it up here then. So the conclusion is that we are not the ultimate doer, right? It's important that we do understand that we do have a small amount of doership, right? So this Prabhu wasn't wrong. We are sort of doers, right? We're not the ultimate doers. And this is a very important lesson, and I bring this up a lot because, and it's not the easiest one to understand, because in this process of Krishna consciousness, we are taught that we have to perform our actions with detachment, right? And for most of us, we conditioned souls, that's a foreign concept, because for us, we think, well, if I'm going to be detached, if I'm not the doer, if I have nothing to do with it, then why should I even try? Why should I even act? If it's all destiny or everything is done by Krishna, then why would I even, I'm an infinitesimal, why would I even bother doing anything, right? If we find out that we're not the doer, that we're not responsible for it, that we're not going to get a reward for it, that's the real reason. Then we just don't want to do anything. We just want to sit back and relax and wait for, whatever's supposed to happen, right? Or if we are asked to do our absolute best at something, you better believe that we want the reward once it turns out good. If it turns out good, we want to, we want the pat on the back, we want the congratulations, we want our name on the plaque on the wall, we want the, we want that, right? We want recognition. We want to think that, no, I was the doer. And so we, being materially conditioned, unfortunately, that's where we're stuck. We either want to perform the work and get the result and enjoy that result, or if we're not going to enjoy the result, we just want to sit back and do nothing, or as little as possible, right? So this is a concept that we have to understand, is that we're not the ultimate doer, but we are one of the doers for now, while we're in material consciousness, right? So it's very important to understand how much doership we have, right? And we have to hold ourselves accountable for our part in this mess that we call the material world, because we did that. We are the doer of that. We misused our free will, and therefore, as a result of that, we have polluted consciousness, where we think ourselves independent from the Supreme Lord, even though it's complete illusion. We are the doer of that. We are the doer of our conditioning. We misused our free will, and here we are in this material world. And we do have the ability to stop misusing our free will, right? To use it properly, to understand that our identity, our I-ness, our ego, right? Ego is not the bad thing. False ego is the bad thing. That's why sometimes early on, it took me a very, very long time to understand why it was called false ego. Like, why not just ego? It's, it's this sense of thing, but ego just is the sense of individuality, which we spirit souls are individuals. So we have that. So real ego is understanding our real position, our real sense of individuality, that we are servants of Krishna, that we are part and parcel of him. So we do have an individual identity, and that is the real ego. The false ego is thinking ourselves independent from Krishna, thinking ourselves independent controllers and enjoyers. So that's why this term false ego is there. And Srila Prabhupada explains that in some purports in Bhagavad Gita. But somehow it takes us a long time for things to get through this thick skull, right? So once we can understand that, we can say, okay, so I do have an actual identity. It's not that that ego is a bad thing. It's just that false ego is a bad thing. So how do I act according to my real ego, my real individuality? Well, Shastra tells us how to do that, right? And Guru tells us how to follow the Shastra. And the sadhus also, by their examples, show us different ways to apply the Shastra. So we certainly are the doer of being put here in this illusion, right? Into this perpetual world of suffering. That we are the doer of, but that's where it ends. So we can't do anything outside of the laws of nature as long as we misuse our free will. We're misusing our free will, then we are, bewildered by the influence of false ego. He thinks himself the doer of activities which are in actuality carried out by the laws of material nature, 327. So as long as we think we are the doer, we are bewildered by the false ego, and we think, and we can't see that material nature is actually dragging us through. But if we start using our free will properly, we start associating with sadhus, taking instructions from the guru, familiarizing ourselves with Shastra so we can actually understand why we do the things that we do, not just blindly following, then we can actually do the right thing and engage in Krishna service. Actually engage in Krishna service. I don't mean, like, so for some of us, we're neophytes. Krishna service means, you go to the temple, you sweep the floor, you clean the pots, you make garlands, these things, like you're serving the deity. But just because you're doing these things that are directly related to Krishna, it doesn't mean we have the proper consciousness. It doesn't mean it's actually service. If we're doing these things for a personal motive, then it's not devotional service, actually. And there's shades of gray. It's not that it's devotional service or it's not, right? There's gradation there. There's, it's partially Krishna service because that, it will be beneficial for your spiritual life. And so you go and you do it. But if you're not actually understanding, and you're not actually, if you're not actually understanding the relationship between you and Krishna and performing it properly, that's not your motive, then it's not pure devotional service. So there's some devotional service there, but it's Mishra, right? So we have these different Mishra Bhaktis, Karma Mishra Bhakti, Jnana Mishra Bhakti. So, but when we do the right thing by actually engaging in Krishna service, and again, to understand how to engage in Krishna service, we have to understand Shastra, right? Through the Guru and through the sadhus. When we actually engage Krishna service, then we are no longer subject to the laws of material nature, right? And so this is what is being explained in all the verses we discussed several verses today, the one from Bhagavatam and some from Bhagavad Gita. So all of those verses are explaining this concept that we can't accomplish anything without Krishna, without his will or without him doing it first. And this is not our eternal nature. Our eternal nature is we don't belong here in the material world. We belong in the spiritual world. And in order to attain that goal, that prayojana, we have to understand our relationship, our sambandha, and we have to act accordingly in devotional service, abhideya. Right. Anyway, that's what these verses are about. So let's stop here and we'll see if there are any questions or comments from anyone. Does not appear that there are any questions or comments or anything else. All right, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. I thank you. Sorry, I just had to walk out of the room to say something. Thank you for elaborating and explaining this topic. It is something that I think is very confusing. And we hear about how we cannot be a doer. And I think you've explained how we are a doer, but just we're only a small part of the equation. It's important because we hear about it all the time. And, just to give light upon it and hear about it more often and elaborating on it as you have done is definitely helpful.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I have I don't have a complete reflection on it yet, but I probably will sometime today as I meditate upon it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Anyone else? Okay. Then we will end here. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.
Jai.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Jakamatarbhasya kripasindhabhyo jayapatitanam bhavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah.
Prabhu, real quick,
Yeah.
a question for you. So this is starting to marinate now.
Okay.
Hola,
Good.
amigo. Oh, muy bien. So if we're not to be so attachment, there's a subtleness to this that I'm starting to feel that. So we're not supposed to be attached to the result of our activity. At the same time, we want to be able to render first-class devotional service to Krishna.
Mhm.
And, you know, obviously, whatever we offer, we want it to be really nice. You know, we're cooking lunch for Krishna. We don't want it to be burned. We don't want it to be sour. We want it to be, you know, very palatable to Krishna. We're dressing Krishna. We want to be fully aware of, you know, the balance and the symmetry and everything that we're doing. We're offering art. We want that to be so. In one sense, we're attached to performing really nice service to Krishna.
Yeah.
And then if it doesn't happen that way, say something is off, we may get mad or disgusted with ourselves, or maybe even another devotee who may have done it like that, because our attachment is like, hey, we have to take this seriously. This is really important. It's the Supreme Personality of God.
Yes.
So there's some attachment to a result that is there. And if it's not there, then it may just be like, okay, well, you tried, good, all glories to your service. And then we use the word standards a lot, but the quality of life begins to diminish. So it wasn't necessarily a question, but it is. I'm trying to think of how to make that into a question of like, how is that different? Is that an okay mentality? Is that different than one's? I guess it should be different than one's material attachment because it's for Krishna, but it's still, are we thinking we're the doer of that situation?
Yeah, it's a very delicate matter, and it's very subtle, as you said. So yes, we always want to do our best, try our best, try to use the best ingredients with what we have. And it becomes obvious to us after a while if we're attached or not. Because if for example, we just won't do the service unless we have the first class ingredients, right? Then that means we're attached in the wrong way, right? It's good to have a standard to set a standard, especially if it's a temple, right? Then the standards have to be there. You know, there's certain amount of offerings and certain amount of preparations, and things happen at certain times. But when we see, so the example I used to give, because we have this whole Yukta Vairagya thing. So Srila Prabhupada, when he was translating the many books that he did, which, you know, just thinking about his life always blows the mind, you know, what he accomplished in such a small amount of time. Anyway, so picture, you know, Srila Prabhupada, he's translating books. When his dictaphone got stolen, picture him just saying, oh, well, I don't have a dictaphone, so I'm, you know, I can't do service anymore, right? No, he doesn't do that, right? He keeps translating until he gets another dictaphone. Like nothing stopped him ever. And there were a lot of things thrown in front of him. There were all these different things. So we have to see that we consistently bring Krishna to our best, despite all of the odds, right? Despite all the different obstacles. And when we can do that, then we know that our attachment is in the right place, because then the attachment is to serving Krishna. Not that we think that we're the doer, but we're so attached to serving Krishna that even if all of the facilities are taken away, we're still serving Krishna, right? That's the right kind of attachment. Until then, it's okay to use our material attachments in Krishna service. So if we are interior decorators for example, in other words, we understand how to make things aesthetically pleasing, then we can use that to dress the deities, and we can even feel proud of it. Like, oh, I did such a nice job, and we can even get some appreciation from the devotees. But gradually, as time goes on, that desire should be purified to the point. And Krishna does these things where when we're in kind of that groove where we're performing this service and the results are great, the devotees are appreciating, then Krishna will throw a wrench in the whole thing. He'll from time to time he'll take a few things away just to see how we react. Are we going to throw a fit and not do the service? Are we going to start yelling at other devotees? Are we going to start blaming? Like, how are we going to react to that? And so we see over time, okay, well, because like I said, it's a gradation. There's a mixture. There's a mixture of being somewhat attached to serving Krishna, but also somewhat attached to feeling ourselves the doer. Because, I know I can make that happen, or I know I can dress the deity better, in a better, that's false ego. When we become more Krishna conscious, we can appreciate even if things aren't going well, because we see the hand of Krishna in it. Now, there are also phenomena, this is why it's so hard to be a manager. There is also a phenomenon where some people just don't care enough to try to do their best. And it can be difficult to distinguish between someone who's not trying their best and therefore having a bad result, and someone who is doing their best, but Krishna's trying to work them through something. From an external point of view, that can be very difficult. And so it can be hard to be a manager because, maybe you're about to chastise someone for not being up to standard when actually Krishna's putting them through something. Or vice versa. Maybe you're thinking, oh, just see this devotee, even though it's not coming out perfect, they're still trying, but really they're, their mind's just not there. So it can be confusing. But as we go through the process, understand Shastra, as we establish that connection with the Guru, as we follow the examples of the sadhus, it becomes more apparent. We become more tolerant. We become more understanding. And we can act according to Shastra instead of our whims. Like, when something doesn't go our way materially, if we're a manager materially, something's not going up to standard, then you either train the person or fire them and rehire someone that's qualified, right? And it's not necessarily the way it works in spirituality. Sometimes it can work something like that. Sometimes someone's engaged in a service that they actually don't belong in. Like Sadaputa Prabhu, his first service, because he was a math genius. So some devotee thought, oh, he's a math guy, so he should be the accountant, right? Knowing Sadaputa Prabhu, being an accountant is a waste of his service. So sometimes people are just put in the wrong service with good intentions. And so sometimes the service has to be adjusted, but it always has to be for the benefit of everyone. It can't just be like, oh no, you're not doing a good job in this, we're taking your service. No, you have to find out what they're good at. It's not taking them away from the service, it's putting them in the right service. That's the important thing. So if the focus is we got to stop this devotee from doing the service, and not we have to find an appropriate service for this devotee, then that's the problem with you. Then you're also materially conscious instead of spiritually conscious. So on the manager's side, so it's tough to actually get that balance. But the more we follow, the more we understand Shastra, the easier it becomes, because there are so many examples in Shastra of different circumstances. Any circumstance you can fathom, it's there in Shastra, and the proper solution for it is also there. We just have to know how to apply it. I guess I went on kind of long on that. Did that help? Do you want to try it, Prabhu? Or did that make
Yes, Prabhu. Yeah, it did make sense. It made me think more as you were talking about, those that have some responsibility and management. You know, how to strike that balance, and that can be tricky, where expectations may exceed something that's going on, or maybe there's something going on there spiritually, where a person is pouring their full heart in to a situation, but the results aren't necessarily coming, or the quality isn't high, but yet they're really a strong devotee, and they're actually situated in the right place. It's just a matter of time, or training, until that may come to fruition. I was just thinking, a lot of times, when you have situations like that, I think one barometer to see where a person is situated is when you give feedback. Are they defensive? Or are they kind of like open to that? Like, yes, I understand, what you're saying. Okay, I can see the quality of what I'm trying to do may need improvement. And, I'm open to trying to improve, as opposed to, we get into like a defensive mode of trying to, and that's kind of a manifestation of the false ego.
Yeah.
Of, you don't understand, you just, we've all been in that situation where we've tried to talk to somebody and they become defensive, and
Yeah. It's certainly one way, but it's not always going to work that way. It would tend to work most of the time to judge it like that with that barometer. But you can also get to a point where, so if Krishna is putting someone through, trying to, get them detached from something, and Krishna's putting them through these things, sometimes that will make someone with good intentions defensive for a period of time anyway. So it's not that, it's a good method, but it's not 100%, it's not foolproof, that one. It's
Sure.
good. Yeah, it's a good way to sort of get an idea of where it might be going, but it's not 100% there. I'd say it's somewhere in the 90%, which is, pretty good. But often it's I find if we try, because I've been in management a few times. I don't like being in management, by the way, because it's hard. But I found that when I would try to, and it's even difficult to let people know that you're actually trying to help in some circumstances, because they think, no, you're just doing your job. Which is why, by the way, a counselor can't be a manager, and vice versa. There has to be one and then the other. It can't be both. A person can have the capacity to do both, but you can't do the both to one person, the same person, because it's a conflict of interest. So if a person has both, though, a counselor and a manager, then a counselor can go and help find the root of the problem. Maybe it's a different service that needs to be there. Maybe it's just an adjustment to the same service. That's why we need all of these things, because a lot of times the manager can't necessarily solve that problem, because that issue isn't necessarily a manager's problem. Covering the service is the manager's problem. But making sure everyone's not just the physical needs, but the needs with their connection, the actual connection with bhakti, that has to be there. There has to be like a brahmana, like a counselor that can help the devotees through that aspect. Because even if you give all of the right ingredients, there's details and there's principles. The manager, he makes sure the situation is proper, the ingredients are there, things like that, and everything is there that can be done. But as far as being able to connect all of those things spiritually, then that's someone else. That's someone else's department. So a lot of times, a manager has to understand when a devotee needs proper counsel. And unfortunately, the way it works is you can't effectively be both. You can ineffectively be both, where either the management aspect or the counseling aspect is going to suffer. But best if best if someone does the counseling and someone else does the management. Does that make sense? Maybe.
Yeah, no, it does.
Yeah, because it's
Because
not
we're
only
assuming, yeah, because I was kind of under I was using it in the terms of the assumption that the manager is also coming at it from a pure place, and sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes the manager is not coming.
yeah,
His
and even
consciousness isn't.
and even if the manager is just you can't be a manager and a counselor at the same time
Yeah.
effectively. You can't.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Yeah. There's a conflict.
There are managers who are good counselors and there are counselors who are good managers, but if you're trying to do both at the same time with the same person, it doesn't work. Unless you're both pure devotees. And and we
It
don't
makes sense.
we don't encounter that. So yeah, a lot of times it's just that a manager, when they're coming up with these problems, a lot of times they're just working out of their wheelhouse, and they shouldn't have to. Honestly, a manager's duty should be regulated to making sure all of the ingredients and all the situation are proper for that particular service. Everything else, has to be done through, Brahminical counsel. And that's not saying that a Brahmana can't be a manager. It's saying that a Brahmana shouldn't be a manager. You have to have a little bit of mode of passion there to manage. You have to have some Kshatriya qualities. And sometimes you got to do the needful. Sure, that's there. Sometimes there's no one else to do the service, so you just have to. We have examples in Shastra of Brahmanas doing Kshatriya things, but they do it very quickly, and then they establish something, a situation where they don't have to do it anymore. And so sometimes it's just that, you have someone in a position of management who shouldn't be in management. Either they're too mode of goodness or they're too mode of ignorance. They don't have the right mixture of goodness and passion. Because if you're too Brahminical, you also can't manage, because you'll effectively be a pushover, and that doesn't work. That's not managing. That's covering everything. Right. So yeah, there's a whole thing where there's a reason why Bhagavad Gita says it's better to engage in your own duty imperfectly than to engage in someone else's perfectly. Right? Because this whole process, any devotional service that we have, whether we're a manager or a pujari or a book distributor or whatever, it's meant to purify our conditioned nature, engage it in Krishna's service. So if we're engaging in someone else's service that has nothing to do with our conditioned nature, we're not purifying anything. We're understanding that it needs to be done, and so we're doing it. And so that's something. It's not nothing. It's something. It's we understand that there is a higher cause, and therefore we're serving it. But it's not purifying our material conditioning, which is necessary in order to uncover our pure self, our actual self. And so that's why Arjuna was to fight, right? He's a Kshatriya, and that's what Krishna wanted. So that's what he had to do. Even though Arjuna was quoting Shastra, wouldn't it be better for so many reasons? For family tradition, for basically he's giving almost unlimited reasons why it would be better for him to just go in the woods and meditate, He's quoting Shastra even, right? Krishna quotes Shastra, so do his devotees. But then Krishna explains, no, that's, you're speaking wise words, but you're lamenting for that which is not worthy of grief. Right? So, or learned words, wise words, same, similar. But yeah, we have to understand that sometimes the problem is us, that we're not in the right position. And we have to sometimes figure out a way to deal with that. And if we are a manager, we actually are a manager. We have that, just that right mixture of goodness and passion. Then we also have to understand that the people we're managing are at various degrees of surrender, they're at various degrees of skill, and we have to be able to expertly determine and adjust what services will be purifying to them. So it's a tough thing. So, but we have to figure it out. Because doing the needful, being an emergency situation, and honestly, any temple that I've ever visited, this is what I see. I see people dealing in emergency mode. I see devotees who should be, holding seminars, and they're just out of their minds trying to get the schedule, worked out. And I see, repeatedly over and over, and I just people who are misengaged, but they're doing it for the right reason because it's emergency mode. But it can't be a perpetual emergency mode. That's why we have such a large turnover rate, right? You have the people who are really, really sincere. They have that, it's Lokika Shraddha. It's strong. But until they actually start engaging their own nature in Krishna service and becoming purified, it's not going to get to the point of Shastriya Shraddha. And when we get to that point, then it becomes clear what our duty is, what our service is, what will help purify, what the next step in purification is. But yeah, no, all of these things we have to be expert in all of these things, and unfortunately, right now, there's not a lot of that going around. But the solution is Shastra. Keep studying Shastra, and it'll become clear. Keep chanting, because sincerity goes a long way, right? If we're sincere, even if we're sincere and we engage in this emergency mode and we know it's not our nature, but we know it has to be done, we keep doing that long enough, then Krishna sends the right people, right? It should be that we understand that sooner and we try to actively find the right people. But eventually Krishna will send the right people for however long we need it. Anyway, I'm going on and on. I don't know if that helped at all. Trying to try to, but
no, it was good. I really enjoyed,
okay.
The thoughts that you were sharing. I really do appreciate it. A lot of times we don't even get to this level of thinking, just because we're
in emergency mode, right?
Yeah,
We can't,
just too busy trying to do the needful.
Figure it out. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did that for many, 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 many years. And it's, in one sense, like I said, it's good because it means that our faith, even though it's not backed up by what it needs, it's strong, which is good. And we see that in most, I don't mean to make fun of them or whatever. It's a good thing. We see that in most Christians, the neophyte Christians. They have very strong faith that, they accepted Jesus, so they're going to be saved. But it's not backed by anything. They don't philosophically know anything. Someone told them this and they had faith in it, and nothing's going to change their mind. It's nice. It's something that's nice. But what's nicer is if you cultivate that faith, right? And we have a lot of that going on in our Krishna consciousness movement, where people have that faith and it's nice and it's strong, but it's not deep, and we have to deepen our faith. We will pick up where we leave off. It's as simple as that. So if we don't make much progress in this life, no worries, we're going to pick up where we left off, but it's not going to be any further than where we left off. We actually have to, again, with the part of this doership, we have to do our part in exercising our free will in the right way, to stop identifying with the false ego, start identifying with the real ego, take the instructions of the guru very seriously, actually associate with sadhus. I talked about this before. Association doesn't just mean proximity. It means this identification. It's sort of like a synonym for association. You actually have to identify with that sat principle, that eternal principle, and apply it into our own lives. That's what sadhu sangha is. But until we actually do that, we will be stuck in this perpetual like emergency mode, which it's not the worst thing, it's just not sustainable. And we're not making much advancement in emergency mode. There's some there. It's showing that our faith is strong, and that's good. That's a good thing. But we have to engage ourselves properly in order to purify our senses. And then it's amazing that once we actually do that, follow the process that's given in Shastra, and engage according to our nature, it actually, the progression takes place quite quickly. It's bananas, honestly. But we have to do it. We actually have to do it. And so if we are managed, we have to be able to understand people's natures and engage them accordingly. And if we ourselves are not engaged properly, we have to figure out a way to do it. Find a counselor and figure out a way to actually find out what our nature is and how to engage that. Anyway, I've probably gone on way too long.
Thank you, Prabhu.
This is the kind of thing that we can talk about forever.
Yeah.
But we should probably stop here. But thank
That was
you.
very helpful.
Thank you for
Thanks.
that. It's always good. This is always my favorite part. The class is a class, but you don't know how much of it anybody's actually relating to. But when it comes to these things, it's like, we're dealing with real experiences and real issues that we're trying to resolve. And so it just becomes more real. It's less theoretical. Like the classes can be real, but the speaker doesn't know if anyone's really relating until we get to this part. So this part is always my favorite. So thank you for that. Even if you tried to force yourself to think of a question, I appreciate that. But but we'll end here.
Thank you, Prabhu. Where are you staying now?
Oh, I'm traveling right now. So this whole thing, this is I'm at a hotel in Maryland. I was in Kentucky for a week, and now I'm on my way back to Pennsylvania. I have to go up to Stuyvesant Falls for a few days, and then back to Kentucky for a little bit, and then Mayapur. But so I'm kind of bouncing around. But I'll be in Pennsylvania for a few days.
Okay. How long are you going to be in Pennsylvania?
That I'm not sure of yet. I kind of, the plans keep evolving as the days go on.
Okay.
But I should be in that general area until at least the 18th of July, but at some point I'll be in Stuyvesant for a few days just to take care of a couple of things.
Okay.
A couple of weeks, sort of, here and there, on and off.
Okay, great. I hope we can run into each other.
Yeah, I hope to see you in person. I'm sure I'll make it happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, Prabhu.